Hello, and welcome to The Brief Insight, your go to podcast for breaking down the latest trends, research, and policies shaping our world. Whether you're passionate about sustainability, global economics, or emerging innovations, this is where we simplify complex ideas to keep you informed and inspired. If you enjoy what you hear, don't forget to like this episode, subscribe to our channel, and share it with anyone looking for insights that matter. We're here every Monday and Friday, so hit that notification bell to stay updated. Your support helps us grow and continue bringing you sharp, relevant content that sparks conversation. Thank you for tuning into The Brief Insight. Now let's dive into today's topic.
Okay, so imagine this. What if you could build a dam twice the size of the most powerful one on Earth right now? China's Three Gorges. That's exactly what one country is planning. And maybe surprisingly, it's not a global superpower, but the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Welcome to our deep dive into the Grand Inga Dam. It's this incredibly ambitious project on the Congo River, right in the heart of Africa. So our mission today, we really want to unpack the huge potential here, understand why it's so important for the African continent. And then, well, we need to look at the massive challenges that have kind of dogged its progress for decades now. We've gathered insights from quite a few places, megabuilds, video transcripts, articles from French side, African News, BBC News, African Business, and Ada Nipad. Okay, let's unpack this. The Congo River itself is a fascinating starting point, wouldn't you say? A true powerhouse of nature.
Oh, absolutely. It really is. And when you talk about the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC, well, it's huge. Africa's second largest country by area, 11th largest in the world, and home to around 95 million people. I mean, that's more than Germany, France, or the UK individually.
Wow.
Yeah. And it has this really unique situation with its neighbor, the Republic of the Congo. The river forms the border. And their capital cities, Kinshasa and the DRC and Brazzaville across the water, they're the closest capitals in the world, literally looking at each other.
But no bridge, right? I heard that.
Exactly. No bridges connecting them currently. There's been talk, a proposed $400 million bridge, but nothing built yet. It's quite something.
It really is. And the river itself, the Congo, it feels like it gets overlooked compared to, say, the Nile or the Amazon.
Yeah.
But it has some absolutely mind-blowing features.
It really does. I mean, first off, it's the deepest river in the world, by far.
How deep are we talking?
Over 200 meters at its deepest point. Just to give you a sense of that scale, imagine taking Brazzaville's tallest building. That's about 106 meters. Okay. And Kinshasa's tallest, around 79 meters. Stack them on top of each other, drop them in the river, and you'd still have water above them. Still room to spare.
That is incredible. A just staggering depth. And it's not just deep. The amount of water flowing, the discharge is massive too.
Oh, yeah. Huge discharge. We're talking about the amount of water flowing per second.
Yeah.
It's 10 times bigger than the Nile.
10 times the Nile.
Yep. And about 1.5 times bigger than China's Yangtze. Now, okay, the Amazon is just, it's in another league entirely. You could combine the Congo, Yangtze, and double the Nile, and the Amazon would still dwarf them.
Right, the Amazon's unique, but still, the Congo's power is undeniable.
Absolutely. And all that power really comes to a head at a place called Inga Falls.
Inga Falls. Now, I've heard there's some debate. Is it technically a waterfall, or is it rapids?
Yeah, there's that debate. But honestly, whether you call it falls or rapids, the point is it's this intense 15-kilometer stretch where the river drops almost 100 meters. And that creates just incredibly powerful, fast-moving water. It's widely considered the biggest, most powerful stretch of white water anywhere in the world.
And incredibly dangerous, too, from what I've read. There are stories.
Oh, definitely. Legendary, almost terrifying stories. The kayaker Steve Fisher famously almost drowned attempting it.
Gosh.
And back in the 70s, there was a French expedition, a team of 7. None of them survived. It just shows the raw, untamed force we're dealing with.
Wow. So that raw power, that fast water, that's where the hydroelectric potential comes in.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that staggering amount of fast-moving water translates into immense potential energy for hydroelectric dams. Experts believe there's enough potential energy just in that Inga section to generate almost 40 gigawatts of power.
40 gigawatts? How much is that, really? Put it in perspective.
Well, it's almost 50 times more than the entire population of the DRC currently uses.
50 times.
Yeah. And it's enough to power a whole bunch of other African countries, too. It's not just, keeping the lights on. It's potentially transformative for industry across the continent.
And that scale is just hard to wrap your head around. And this isn't a new idea, right? People have seen this potential for a long time.
Oh, for over a century. Yeah. There was a survey way back finding the Congo had, and I quote, more than 1/4 of the world's potential water power. The potential was recognized very early on.
So what happened? Were there early attempts to harness it?
There were. Back in the 1950s, Belgium, which controlled the Congo then, had plans to build dams at Inga. But those got shelved when the DRC gained independence. But the new DRC government picked up the idea. They ordered the construction of Inga first, which had 6 turbines, and then later Inga the second with 8 turbines.
Okay, so they did build something.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Together, Inga II had a capacity of almost 2 gigawatts. And that power was pretty important, especially for industries like copper mining.
But 2 gigawatts. Compared to the 40 gigawatt potential you mentioned, that sounds like just scratching the surface.
You're absolutely right. That's a great point. They were built on a side stream of the main river, so they only captured less than 5% of Inga's total potential power.
Why only 5%? Was that all they could manage back then?
Well, it was still a huge project for its time, but harnessing the full power, that required a much grander vision, more complex engineering, and crucially, more funding than was feasible then. And unfortunately, that was decades ago.
Yeah.
The situation now with Inga Ion and the Suk, it's not great.
What do you mean?
Well, they've really degraded over the years. There's been a chronic lack of maintenance, and today they're operating at barely 30% of their original capacity.
Only 30%. That's a huge drop.
It is, and it highlights a major issue. We saw that tragic example recently in Libya, where 2 poorly maintained dams collapsed, killing thousands.
Right, a terrible reminder of why maintenance is critical.
Exactly. Now, Inga Ion 2 aren't showing signs of, imminent collapse like that, thankfully, but their low output really underscores the struggle the DRC has had with upkeep, which is a big concern when you think about even bigger projects.
So, okay. Existing dams are struggling, operating way below capacity. The need for power is huge. That brings us to the really big idea, right? The Grand Inga Dam.
Precisely. The vision shifted from just fixing the old dams to something much, much bigger.
Yeah.
Harnessing every single drop of that 40 gigawatt potential.
How on earth do they plan to do that? It sounds immense.
It's immense. The plan is incredibly audacious. Basically, they want to build a huge 200-meter-long wall at the southern end of a place called the Bindi Valley. Think of it like a giant plug.
Okay, a plug.
And this wall would have 6 massive power stations. Then they'd build another wall, this one at the top of Inga Falls itself, to actually divert the river's main flow, the rapids, into this Bindi Valley.
So they divert the river into this valley.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Fill it up like a giant bathtub. Then gravity does the work. All that water rushes down through the turbines in those power stations at the bottom wall.
And that gets you the full 40 gigawatts.
That's the plan. 40 gigawatts of power.
Which would make it the biggest in the world.
By a long shot. If completed, Grand Inga would generate more than twice the power of China's Three Gorges Dam, which is currently #1.
Wow. The potential impact. I mean, you mentioned nearly half the population in Africa lacks electricity access. This could be revolutionary.
Absolutely. It's often described as a potential catalyst for the industrialisation of Africa. It could fundamentally change the energy landscape for millions, addressing critical shortages across the continent.
It's a really compelling vision. But then you hit the reality check, the price tag. What are we talking about cost-wise?
Yeah, this is where it gets really challenging. The estimated construction cost is astronomical, around $80 billion.
80 billion with a B.
$80 billion. And just to put that in context, that's significantly more than the DRC's entire annual gross domestic product.
So how could the DRC possibly afford that? You said they struggle just to maintain the existing dams.
Exactly. Self-funding is pretty much out of the question. That's why the whole project hinges on foreign investment and getting what they call off-takers.
Off-takers, meaning?
Big customers, basically. Other countries or major industries that commit upfront to buy large amounts of the power once it's generated. That makes investors feel more secure.
Have countries shown interest?
Yes, definitely. South Africa and Nigeria have officially stated they're interested in paying for a slice of Grand Inga's power. Guinea and Angola have also expressed interest.
South Africa seems like a key player here. I read they signed a treaty.
They did. Back in August 2014, they signed the Grand Inga Treaty. The plan is for them to import 2,500 megawatts by 2030 and potentially double that later to 5,000 megawatts.
And they're putting money in. How much?
A very significant amount. Reports mention South Africa financing 204 billion South African rands for the project.
204 billion rands. Okay, what's that in US dollars, roughly? And why is that figure controversial?
Right, 204 billion rands translates to roughly 11 billion US dollars, which is a massive commitment.
Yeah, huge.
And yeah, it immediately raises eyebrows. especially when you consider Eskom. South Africa's power utility is deeply in debt, and the country's had its own serious power supply issues for, what, 15 years now?
So people wonder why they're investing abroad instead of fixing problems at home.
Exactly. There's a lot of speculation about corruption, frankly. Critics argue that money could be better used to sort out South Africa's own power grid. Plus, the cost of actually importing that power from Inga would be huge for Eskom, over 10 billion rands per year. And guess who'd likely pay for that?
Ordinary South Africans through higher bills.
Most likely, yes, higher tariffs, which just fuels those corruption concerns even more.
So the main partner, South Africa, their involvement is already complicated. What about other big international funders, like the World Bank?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the project's entire budget raises suspicion, especially with the inconsistent financing we've seen. It's been very stop-start. Take the World Bank. They actually authorized a $73 million budget back in 2014 to help get things going.
Okay, that sounds promising.
It did. But then, just 2 years later, July 2016, they suspended the funding. They cited strategic differences with the DRC government.
Strategic differences, that sounds vague.
It often is. But the good news, maybe, is that they reportedly resumed talks in late 2023. The World Bank's Global Director for Energy sounded somewhat optimistic, but it shows the instability.
Has that happened with others too? This in-again, out-again funding?
Yes. The African Development Bank, the AFDB, they approved a $68 million grant, but then later pulled their funding too. And private companies have been hesitant. A Spanish firm, ACS, wavered on funding back in 2020. And maybe the biggest blow recently, just last week, according to one source, was the Chinese state-owned Three Gorges Corporation withdrawing.
The Three Gorges Corporation, the ones who built the actual Three Gorges Dam.
The very same. A huge potential partner with deep pockets and, crucially, the technical expertise. Reports suggest they were frustrated with how the DRC president was handling the project.
Wow, losing them must have really hurt the project's momentum.
Absolutely. It makes the already difficult funding situation even tougher.
And on top of finding $80 billion, there's the risk of cost overruns, right? These mega projects rarely stick to budget.
You're absolutely right. That's almost a given with projects of this scale. Historically, most large dams cost significantly more than projected, often double.
Double. So Grand Inga could realistically cost closer to $160 billion.
It's certainly possible, yes. And then you have to factor in another major problem: corruption.
Which is known to be a serious issue in the DRC.
A massive issue, unfortunately. Government officials taking bribes, funds getting siphoned off. It makes it much less likely that even the initial $80 billion would be enough, let alone $160 billion. Investors see this, and it makes them incredibly wary.
So the financial hurdles are just enormous. But there are other costs too, aren't there? Huge social and environmental ones. Let's talk about the people living there.
Yeah, and this raises an important question about the social impact, specifically the displacement of people. This isn't empty land. Building this dam, flooding the Bundi Valley, it would require relocating tens of thousands of local villagers. Estimates range from 30,000 up to maybe 37,000 people.
30 to 37,000 people losing their homes and land? Has this happened before with Ingabuna too?
Tragically, yes. And the history there is really concerning. Back in the 60s and 70s, when Inga 2 and Squee were built, 6 settlements were forcibly relocated.
Forcibly relocated.
Yes. And those people, they never received the compensation they were promised.
Never.
Never.
Yeah.
And reports indicate that today, decades later, up to 75,000 people, descendants and original displacees, are still living in what sources call hellish conditions in a remote hilltop camp.
75,000 people still
Yeah.
suffering from displacements that happened 50 years ago. That's appalling.
It is. And it's often pointed to as an example of, well, corruption-like behavior. It casts a very long shadow over any new plans for relocation. People are understandably skeptical.
Understandably so. It just destroys trust. Okay, besides the human cost, what about the environmental impact? Hydropower gets called green, but these huge dams...
Right. It's not always so simple.
Mhm.
While it's renewable, mega dams definitely have an environmental burden. Just the construction itself will cause significant deforestation. You need to clear land for the dam, the facilities, and especially for the transmission lines. We're talking about 3,100 kilometers of power lines cutting through forests.
3,000 kilometers. That's a lot of trees.
A huge amount. And then there's the flooding of the Bundi Valley itself. That means a major loss of biodiversity.
What kind of biodiversity are we talking about?
Both aquatic life in the river and the ecosystems on the land that gets flooded, including agricultural land. The Congo River system is incredibly rich. It has at least 700 known fish species.
700, wow.
Yeah, second only to the Amazon globally in freshwater fish diversity. Losing habitat like the Bundy Valley has a real impact.
And that affects people too, right? Not just the fish.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That biodiversity helps feed the large population in Kinshasa downstream. And losing forests, well, that impacts air quality regulation, which affects everyone globally. There was a study in 2018 showing that many large-scale hydropower projects in Europe and the U.S. actually ended up being pretty disastrous for the environment in the long run.
It also seems like, are they ignoring other energy options? Doesn't the DRC have potential for things like solar?
That's a major criticism, yes. Critics point out that the DRC is actually rich in other, potentially more environmentally friendly energy sources. It sits in a high-level sunbelt, making solar panels very feasible. There's also potential for wind, geothermal power, even biogas.
So why the laser focus on this one megadam when there are alternatives?
It definitely raises questions about the project's priorities and overall credibility, especially when those alternatives could be less costly and have fewer negative impacts.
And then there's the big question. Who actually benefits if this thing ever gets built? Is it the 80% of Congolese people who don't have electricity now?
That's a huge point of contention. Many critics argue, quite forcefully, that the primary beneficiaries won't be ordinary Congolese citizens. They believe the power is mainly destined for South African consumers and the DRC's own large mining companies, which are energy hungry.
Are there claims backing that up?
Congolese civil society groups allege that most of the electricity output has already been promised, essentially pre-sold, to South Africa and the mines.
So the people living closest to the dam, the ones potentially displaced, might not even get the power.
That's the fear. Now, DRC authorities push back a bit. They say Inga alone can't solve everything, but it could be a catalyst for national change. And the World Bank says it's exploring ways to ensure the benefits are shared more broadly.
But the need is clearly urgent for ordinary people. I remember that awful incident in Kinshasa.
Yes, the electrocution tragedy in the Matadi Kabbalah food market in early 2022, a high-voltage cable disconnected and fell. It was horrific. It just starkly highlights the desperate, immediate need for safe, reliable power right there in the capital. To be fair, the DRC authorities have acknowledged the risks of displacement, and they have promised resettlement with basic services and fair compensation. They've also acknowledged the environmental risks and say they plan assessments.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
Well, the but is that, according to reports, they haven't actually raised enough money yet to even fund those crucial environmental and social impact studies. So the promises are there, but the resources to back them up, maybe not yet.
So it all sounds incredibly complex and fraught with problems. Decades of talk, grand visions. But where does it actually stand? Why hasn't anything new been built?
Well, the blunt assessment from one observer was pretty stark. It is a project in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It does not have the credibility.
Ouch. Why such a harsh judgment?
It boils down to those persistent issues we've discussed. Decades of corruption, a real lack of basic infrastructure, incredibly sluggish development overall, and although Inga itself is far from the conflict zones, the ongoing instability in other parts of the country definitely spooks investors.
They're just afraid they won't get their money back.
Essentially, yes. They're afraid of pouring billions into a project that might stall for decades or never yield returns because of the country's instability. Plus, the fact that the Congolese government itself hasn't put significant financial skin in the game also contributes to delays. It makes potential partners hesitant. Officially, construction on parts of this grand vision, or at least planning and initial works, has been sort of underway since 1995, but characterized by a lack of progress and lack of transparency. Inga III was supposed to start in 2020, then pushed to 2026. It keeps slipping.
Okay, that sounds pretty damning. But is that the whole story? I've heard some argue that these kinds of delays are actually normal for projects this big.
That's the counter-argument, yes. And it's a fair point to consider. Professor George Agitas, who's a hydropower expert, he argues that years of delays and changing partners are kind of normal for major infrastructure projects globally.
Can you give an example?
He points to the UK's Mersey Tidal project, first proposed back in 1984, and it's still not built today. Does that mean the UK is fundamentally unstable? Probably not. Agitas actually describes the Grand Inga project itself as technically doable.
So it's challenging, but not necessarily impossible or uniquely cursed?
Exactly. Another executive, Alexander Schwab from Andritz, a company involved in hydro projects, said something similar. He noted that about 1 in 3 major infrastructure projects worldwide gets stalled somewhere along the line, and he actually called Grand Inga one of the best mega projects in the world. purely based on its raw and natural potential. So from an engineering and potential viewpoint, there's still optimism in some quarters.
Hmm. So a mix of deep skepticism and some persistent optimism. But that recent news about the Chinese Three Gorges Corporation pulling out, that feels like a significant setback, especially right after the World Bank seemed to be re-engaging.
It definitely does suggest that the DRC is still struggling to keep all the necessary players aligned and committed. Maintaining that unity, especially financial unity, seems to be a constant battle.
So realistically, where does that leave things?
Realistically, construction on the grand scale cannot begin unless and until that massive funding is truly secured and stays secure. So for now, despite the undeniable potential, the Grand Inga Dam remains largely what it has been for decades, a grand vision.
Right. So we've really covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at the sheer incredible natural power of the Congo River at Inga Falls. We've seen the potential of the Grand Inga Project to literally transform Africa's energy future, bringing power to potentially millions. But wow, we've also had to confront the daunting challenges, the absolutely astronomical costs, the incredibly complex financing, the constant coming and going of investors.
And those deep-rooted issues of corruption and governance within the DRC, which just cast such a long shadow over everything.
Not to mention the profound human costs for local communities facing displacement, with a very worrying history there, and the significant environmental impacts on a unique ecosystem.
It really lays bare the tough choices involved.
It absolutely does. And this whole project, with its potential for such massive benefit on one hand and such massive cost, financial, human, environmental on the other, it really forces you, the listener, to think, doesn't it? How do nations balance these huge development ambitions with the very real, immediate costs? Especially when it seems like the benefits might not even flow directly to the communities bearing the brunt of the impact.
It's a fundamental dilemma in development worldwide.
It really is. And it's definitely a question worth mulling over as this dream, this vision of the Grand Inga Dam, continues on its very long, very winding, and still very uncertain journey.